I didn't really get a chance to do anything on this holiday last year due to being violently and horrifically ill. But I really want to do something this year, and a very close friend of mine, one of my best friends, Gary, who I've mentioned several times on the show, shared something with me. He wanted me to proof it, actually, and to verify if it was Drek, I believe was his exact wording. But it was rather well written, well intended, well meant, and I asked him permission to go ahead and share it on the show in celebration not only of May the 4th, but just the concept in general, and he said yes. So, with his permission, I am now going to share this with you. I hope you enjoy it. This is non fictitious, in case you're curious. We went to see him Saturday morning, much the same as we went to see him every day that week. He wasn't awake this time, but my grandmother wished to stay this time. She sat there and read her book and waited for him to wake up. I came and went a couple of times, making sure she was okay, and checking to see if he had come too so we could talk some more. The third time I came by was like the other times. He was sleeping, but she was reading her book. I sat for a while, looking at the two of them, then lost in my own thoughts. But this time the nurse came in. She went to the bedside and began checking things. After a minute she said, "He has just passed on." My grandfather was an important person in my life, and not just because he was a close relative. A man I'd known my whole life, looked up to, and everyone believed the two of us were very similar. He was a quiet man, calculated in what he would say, or even if he would say anything at all. Much of my childhood, any interactions with him were a few words at best. I remember with great fondness one Christmas that he bought me a book about sciences. The book was immemorable, but receiving the book was what stood out to me. He must have said more to me that day in his excitement that I was interested in science than all the time I'd spent with him before combined. After high school, I'd moved in with them. At first, it was because I hadn't quite grown up yet, and being there allowed me to avoid the responsibilities of life. But in 13 years of living there, it became more about taking care of the two of them, and being there as they needed someone. In the last year, we had a major family crisis, and like any that had come before, everyone looked to him for guidance. The difference this time, for me, was that he would confide in me his concerns about it. We talked at length, in a manner that was unprecedented for him and I, about these things and life in general. Last year he succumbed to pneumonia. I had lost my father before this, but I think I took this much harder. This was a man I'd respected all my life, a man who was similar to me. My dad loved me and cared for me, but his relationship with me was often distant, as he had to live in one place and we lived elsewhere, and the short weekend interactions were usually about doing things we liked, more than living everyday life together. My grandfather was always the voice of reason in the family, and in his last years that I spent in his house, I became a responsible adult, someone he was proud of. He was there with me every day, and in relation to my life as a whole, he represents the major father figure. Last year, as friends were declaring, "May the 4th be with you," to one another, I was calling my mom to tell her her father was gone. I was there with the family, being a shoulder to cry on, and crying myself. We had lost the most important man any of us would ever know, the head of the family. I was reliving the loss of my dad as well. My dad loved Star Wars. I love it through his passion for it. We watched the original trilogy so many times as I was growing up that I could at one time cite the entire script as it played. He would often try to teach me life lessons by quoting the movies in some way. When the first major books came out, he bought them, and we read them, and I kept up this tradition for a while after his passing, buying each new book as they came out. I went to see the first remastered versions in the theater, cried at the ending in memory of him. These were movies I loved, but at this point, it meant so much more to me. My grandfather enjoyed Star Wars a bit himself. I think. He was always a private man, but there were signs. He had the trilogy on the shelf of his selected movies he kept, and much of his library was science fiction. But he always loved orchestra, and I'd like to think that John Williams' soundtrack was perhaps one of the greatest productions of movie music history. The orchestral pieces playing in the background of the Star Wars movie are part of what draws in, part of what makes these such great movies. You can listen to the music alone and be brought into the greatest moments of those movies. I have lost two of the closest contacts I will ever make, and in both cases it has been somewhat connected to this series, but I will not have this become about loss for me. I choose to have it be a remembrance. I will remember watching with my dad as a child. I will remember the good moments we had. I will remember how great an influence my grandfather had upon me. I will be thankful for the time we had towards the end, our long talks. I will remember the pride he seemed to have as I started a new career while he was losing his battle. But perhaps most importantly on this day, I will not have it become associated to my loss for me. I would also hope that it does not become a tragic memory for you if you have had a similar connection and loss in your life. I would invite you all to remember those who were close to you, the bonds you may have formed as I did with this movie, and your friends and family will be with you forever, and they should be celebrated rather than turned into a gimmick. Life should be more sincere than that, more meaningful. And perhaps you would form these close connections with your loved ones, wives, husbands, sons, daughters. I would have you honor the memories of those you have lost as much as I would honor those of mine. May the 4th be with you.